This section of the course will explore the dust explosion, and the final animation for it will look something like that. We will combine vector and raster graphics to draw this animation as quickly as possible, yet still make it look good. So are you ready? Let's get started. First, I'm going to create a new file. Same as always, let's make it 1500 on 1500 pixels, and the resolution should be 300 pixels per inch. Good. Then let's color the background in dark gray, so that it will be easier for us to see the dust particles on it later on. Great. Next, I'm creating a new layer for the frame number 1. Okay, let's pick a color for the dust. It should be light gray, so something like this will do. I'm switching to the brush tool, making sure that the type is set to hard round brush and opacity to 100%. Awesome. Let's make the brush size a bit bigger like that. And then make a few clicks somewhere around the center of the canvas. Make the brush size a bit bigger once more. Good. We start to see a small cloud of dust here. Feel free to change the brush size to randomize the shape like I do. Great. Next, I want to add a few highlights for this cloud. Let's pick a very bright color, maybe even white, add another layer on top of this one, and make a few clicks in the central part of the cloud. Again, I'm changing the brush size all the time to get a random look of the shape. Make sure that you stay inside the cloud boundaries, though. All right, I think it looks pretty good. I'm selecting both of these layers and placing them under a new group, calling it Frame 1. Okay, then let's align the cloud to the center of the canvas. Yeah, that's good enough. And finally, let's disable the background layer's visibility and press Ctrl plus Shift plus Alt plus E to copy and merge these layers into a new one, renaming it to Frame 1. Excellent. So this is how the dust explosion will start, from these tiny cloud. As you can see, we've used the brush tool instead of vector shapes this time. The reason for that is quite simple. It takes less time to draw the cloud this way, unlike with merging a number of ellipses. Besides, this frame will appear for only a fraction of a second, and you won't really notice the difference anyway. All right, let's proceed to the next frame. On the frame number 2, the cloud is going to become bigger, about twice as big as the original one. Same as with the heart, it should inflate from the inside right before it explodes. So let's switch to the gray color, creates a new layer, and start making a few clicks right on top of the previous frame until we cover it completely. Changing the brush size to randomize the shape. Yeah, now it looks interesting enough. Let's align it with the center of the canvas. Okay, and now for the highlights. Same as before, I'm switching to the white color, creating a new layer, and making a few clicks inside the cloud boundaries. You don't have to connect the shapes of the highlights. Just make sure they correspond with the base shape, more or less. Adding some of the tiny ones here below. Yeah, I think it looks good. Now placing the new layers under a separate group and calling it Frame 2. Good. Now I feel like I can make a few last adjustments for the highlights. Nice. And finally, let's merge these layers into a new one and call it Frame 2. Awesome. The second frame is done as well. Now let's proceed to the frame number 3 right away. On the next frame, the cloud will become even bigger and will have a hole in the center like a donut. I'm creating a new layer, switching to the gray color and making the brush size a lot bigger. Then I'm making a few clicks on top of the outer edge of the cloud, like so. Don't forget to use different brush sizes and feel free to experiment with them. You don't have to make the cloud look symmetrical. A few tiny strokes here and there. And finally, coloring the central part of the cloud as well. Good. Now, since we want to make it look like a donut, let's cut a hole in the center. This time I'm going to use an eraser tool for that. Make sure that the mode is set to brush, the opacity is 100%, and the brush type is hard round. Okay, then I'm erasing a shape in the center of the cloud. The inner shape reminds me of the frame number 1. All right, I think that's enough. The next step is to add a few highlights for this donut. Selecting the white color here below, switching to the brush tool, then creating a new layer, and starting to draw the highlights on top of the base shape. A couple of clicks on the right side. Then proceed into the left, and then down. Making a few additional clicks to randomize it. And also adding the highlights for these small circles on the edges. The more details you add, the better. Okay, this looks fine to me. Same as always, I'm grouping these layers and calling the new group Frame 3. Then disabling the background for a minute and merging the layers into a new one. Renaming it to Frame 3 as well. Great, another frame is complete now. On the next frame, our dust cloud splits into multiple parts, and these parts start to move away from each other. Creating a new layer, switching to the gray color, and starting to paint the smaller dust clouds near the edges of the donut. The new cloud should overlap the outer edge of the previous frame like this. Making a few smaller particles here and there. Some of them will be pushed farther away from the center, like so. Let's switch off the previous frame to see what we've got now. Nice. Now I want to randomize the shapes even further by making some additional brush strokes with different brush sizes. Since it's going to take a while, I'll speed up the video to save your time. All right. Now the clouds look a lot more random, but there is still something that I want to add to these shapes. This will be something different from what we've done before. I would like all of the bigger clouds to have tails, because that will emphasize the strength of the explosion. I'm choosing the curvature pen tool for this task. Make sure that the field color is set to gray. Then I'm going to the upper right cloud and making a few clicks like so. You don't have to close the shape, just click Enter. Great! Now this cloud has a tail, giving this explosion a bit more power. Let's add a few more tails to other dust clouds as well. Creating a new shape on the opposite side. Adding another tail here. And the last cloud will have to tails. Awesome. The dust particles already look a lot more interesting than before. Also, feel free to adjust the position and the rotation of a tail to fit the clouds better. Finally, let's select all of the new layers and group them. Calling the new group Frame 4. Great. The next step is to draw some highlights for all of these dust clouds. Same as always, I'm starting from the upper right one and making a few clicks here. Then proceed into the one below. As I've mentioned before, you can experiment with the brush sizes as much as you like. This will take me a few minutes to finish, so I will speed up the video again to save you some time. We've added a lot of highlights here, but the frame is still not complete. Let's randomize the highlights even further by creating some different shapes. I will use the curvature pen once again. Starting from the cloud on the right and making a few clicks on top of the gray area here. It seems I forgot to update the field color, so let's change it to white. Awesome! The new shape looks differently from the perfect circles we've drawn with a brush tool. Let's add another one here above. Then another curvy shape in the middle here. And another one on the tail. Perfect! This looks way more interesting than before. Let's do the same for the rest of the dust clouds. Adding the highlights for the double tails here. Then a small highlight here at the top. And the last one here. I think it looks good. So let's disable the background visibility, then press Ctrl plus Shift plus Alt plus E and merge the layers into a new one. Let's call it Frame 4. Excellent. We've successfully created the first half of the dust explosion animation. In the next lecture, we're going to draw the rest of the frames. So see you in the next one. All right, let's go ahead and draw the next frame for the dust explosion. On the frame number 5, the dust clouds will become a bit smaller. They're also going to move a bit farther away from the center. Let's create a new layer, switch to the brush tool, and select the gray color. Then I'm making a few clicks on top of the outer edge of the upper right cloud, like so. Good. Proceeding to the lower one. To the one on the left. And the one up here. And lastly, defining the new positions for each one of the smaller dust particles. Great! Let's give these clouds a more cartoony look. I'm going to use the curvature pen tool and create a few shapes that will overlap these circles. Making a curve like so, and closing it. Nice. See? These dust cloud looks far more interesting. Now let's do the same for the rest of the clouds. Adding a shape for the one on the left. Then proceed into this one at the bottom. And another one next to it. Good. Well, the clouds look better now, but we're not done with them yet. Same as we did for the frame number 4. I'm going to add tails for each of the bigger ones. Starting with a cloud on the right. The tail should become thinner on this frame like this. Each cloud will have a few of them, so I'm adding another tail next to the previous one. And one more tail here. Well, maybe another one here in the middle. Okay, moving to the cloud on the left. Adding a few smaller tails here. I would also like to make the curves here look smooth, so I'll add a couple of shapes as a fix. Looks pretty awesome. I'm going to continue adding tails for the rest of the clouds. And since the technique is exactly the same as I've shown you just now, I'll speed up the video to save you some time. All right, we've drawn a lot of tails, and it's about time to group all of these shapes into a separate group. I'll call it frame 5. Good. Now let's make a few fixes for the clouds. First, I don't like how this tail looks, so I'll delete it. Okay. Next, let's switch to the brush tool. Select the layer 9 inches in the layers list and make a couple of clicks on top of this cloud. Yeah, that looks better. Let's randomize the small dust particles as well. Great. A few final touches for the larger clouds. Awesome. And finally, let's add a number of tiny particles to make the explosion look rich. I'm using different brush sizes here as well. Okay, I think that's enough. Now it's time to add the highlights for the dust clouds. I'm creating a new layer at the top of the group. Switching to the white color and selecting the brush tool. Then I'm making the brush size much bigger and starting to draw the highlights. Again, try to stay inside the cloud's boundaries and use different brush sizes to make the shapes look detailed and random. A few highlights for the smaller particles. Good. Next, I'm switching to the pen tool, making sure that the field color is set to white and starting to add even more highlights. Adjusting the position of the shape so that it fits the cloud better. Nice, moving to the tail. Then another one. It's going to take a while to add all of these details, so I'm going to speed up the video again to save your time. Once you're satisfied with how the clouds look, you can disable the background visibility, then press Ctrl plus Shifts plus Alt plus E and merge the layers into a new one. Rename it to Frame 5. Excellent. Another frame is complete now. Let's go ahead and proceed to the frame number 6. On this frame, the dust clouds will start to dissipate. They will become much smaller than before, and will also split into several smaller ones. So let's start from creating a new layer, selecting the brush tool and switching to the gray color. Making the brush size a bit bigger and creating a few circles, touching the outer edge of the dust cloud here. Okay, let's make another one here on the right, then here below. A few clicks here. Make sure that you don't forget any of the dust clouds, even the smaller ones. And of course, mix between different brush sizes to make the clouds look random. Adding a few additional particles where the bigger clouds were, and some tiny ones farther away from the center like this. Great! This is a good start, but we haven't finished yet. I'm selecting the curvature pen on the toolbar and start creating a curved shape right on top of this cloud to customize it further. Yeah, they should do, creating another shape right next to it. Good. Moving to the cloud here on the right. Then another one here, and so on. Creating a shape for almost every one of them. Then grouping the layers into a new group and calling it Frame 6. Okay, I see that this shape seems to be unnecessary because it doesn't correspond to the cloud shape on the previous frame, so I delete it. Then I'm selecting the curvature pen and start drawing small tails for the bigger dust clouds. They should be shorter and thinner than details on the previous frame. Once the details will be complete, I'll proceed with highlights. This is going to be pretty much the same as we've done for the previous frame, so increase the speed of the video once again. Okay, I think the clouds look good enough. So I'll switch off the background layer, press CTRL plus Shift plus ALT plus E, and create a new layer at the top of the list, renaming it to Frame 6. Excellent. Moving on to the next frame. On the frame number 7, the clouds will become even smaller and will split into more parts. I'm creating a new layer and starting from the pen tool this time. Then I start creating small shapes like this. Try to make the outer curve look round, but it doesn't have to be perfect. A few shapes down here. Then here on the left. And the last one here. Great. Let's keep the shapes organized and move them under a new group. Calling it frame 7. Okay, then I'm creating a new layer inside the group, switching to the brush tool and start clicking along the inner edges of the shapes like so. Again, I'm constantly changing the brush sizes so that the clouds will look more interesting. Don't forget to define the next positions for each one of the smaller particles to create a fluid motion for them. Don't be afraid to experiment and add as many details as you like. I'm even adding some new particles here and there. A few final touches. Okay, that should be enough. Lastly, let's go ahead and add the highlights. Same as always, I'm selecting the white color, creating a new layer, and switching to the brush tool. Then, I start clicking on top of the clouds, drawing the random-looking shapes by changing the brush size all the time. Not all of the particles should have a highlight, but the larger ones should have them for sure. A few less clicks. All right, now let's finalize the highlights by drawing some custom shapes with a pen tool. Creating one here at the top. Another one next to it. Then here. And here. Again, I'm trying to add as many details as I can, especially in the thin areas like here. This is going to take me a couple of minutes to complete, so speed up the video again for your convenience. All right, this frame looks pretty good to me, so I'll switch off the background again and merge the layers into a new one. Renaming the layer to frame 7. Okay, on the frames number 8 and 9, the dust clouds are going to leave only small traces. The particles are going to keep moving away from the center and become significantly smaller, so much so that I won't even add any highlights for them. Instead, I'm using the white color from the start and drawing very thin shapes like this. As you can guess, these clouds are splitting into several parts again. I'm going to draw some shapes for each and every cloud and then switch to the brush to add some details. And of course, I won't forget about the small particles and create a motion for them as well. Since you're already familiar with the process, I'll speed up the video for the last time. Great, the frame looks complete now. Let's switch off the background and create a single layer for the frame number 8. Awesome. The next frame is going to be the last one. As you can see, the dust clouds have pretty much dissipated, so what's left to draw is just some tiny particles. I'm creating a new layer and using the brush tool, adding a few strokes where the bigger clouds were, adding a few details. And some very small particles as well. A few final dots to make it look richer. Okay, that's it. Now, since we've used just a single layer for this frame, we don't have to create a group or merge anything. Let's just rename this layer to Frame 9. Excellent. All right, it seems we've drawn all of the frames we needed. Let's change the opacity for the last few frames so that the opacity will look gentle. The frame number 7 should have 75%. Frame number 8, 50%. And the last frame, 25%. Great. Then, as always, I'm saving my work in 2 separate PSD files, one with the source materials and one with the frames only. In the frames PSD file, I'm deleting all of the layers groups like this. Okay, once it's done, let's go to Window and GT, Timeline and GT, Create Frame Animation. Then pressing the menu icon and choosing Make Frames from Layers. Deleting the frame number 1 on the timeline, and then enabling the background layer for all of the frames. Great. Finally, let's hit play to test animation. Looks pretty good to me. It definitely looks cartoony, and each one of the clouds has a continuous motion until the very last frame. However, something doesn't feel right. The start of the explosion feels a bit too smooth, even weak. So how do we fix that? Well, there is a way. We need to make the beginning of the animation play faster, and we can do that by removing one of the frames. I'd say the frame number 2 is not that necessary for the explosion. It is just a bigger version of the frame number 1. So let's delete it from the timeline. Make sure you delete the frame from the timeline only and not from the players list. We might still want to use it if the experiment fails, right? Clicking yes and hitting play. Now the explosion starts faster and it feels more powerful this way. Let's keep it like this. That's it for the dust explosion animation. I hope you found this lecture useful and learned something new from it. In the next section of the course, we're going to talk about a toxic gas explosion. This will be a good chance to practice everything you've learned so far. So see you there.